Hi and welcome to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about the variegated string of hearts, how you can care for it, 2 ways in which you can grow it, and also 2 ways in which you can propagate it. But before we get into the video, hi, my name's Alexis and this is Wild Houseplants. I'm a houseplant enthusiast and I also work as a houseplant technician, which basically means when I'm not looking after my own plants, I'm looking after other people's. If you don't follow me over on Instagram, you can find me there at Wild Houseplants, and if you do enjoy this video today, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button below, because it really helps out my channel. Okay, let's talk variegated string of hearts. Okay, so as you can see, I have 2 of the variegated string of hearts in my collection. Well, 2 sort of main plants, but I do always have lots of little propagations popping up everywhere as well, because they are really easy to propagate and they are such a rewarding plant. What I love about the variegated string of hearts is just this sort of pale green that you get on the front, and then these bright purpley pink backs that you get to the leaves. Now, obviously, the more sun exposure that you give these plants, and they can take a lot of sun, a lot of bright light, the more pinky purple the variegation is going to be. So both these plants, well, this one actually sits under a grow light and this one sits right in my south facing window. So the backs of my plants are always this bright pink colour. And if you were to have them in a slightly lower light spot, the vibrancy of the pink would probably just be a little bit duller. But they do really prefer to have lots of bright light. Now this one, as you can see, is just a very long trailing plant, and it's definitely ready for a chop because the place where it sits in my living room, it's starting to like dangle down on the chair. So anyone who's sitting in that chair is getting string of hearts in the face. So that's why we're gonna chop this one today. But I was gonna hang this one up here for a second. Got a handy little nail. But this one I decided to grow slightly differently, and I decided to grow it around this trellis here. So I've just got a circular trellis, and when the plant was long enough, I just wrapped it around, and I've let these bits sort of like trail down here like this. But sometimes when the new growth comes in, if I get like the odd stem, like these ones that tend to fall down in the middle, these are the ones that I tend to wrap around just to keep the trellis looking full. And then I just use these little butterfly clips that you can get from like when you bought orchids and stuff like that. One of these little butterfly clips, and I just use this to sort of clip it in place to keep the stems growing sort of around the trellis like this. But I also think this looks really nice, and it's just like a slightly different way of growing it. Because when you have multiples of the same plant, I think it's sometimes nice to experiment with how you can display them in different ways. So yeah. I briefly touched on light at the beginning, but really for these plants to thrive, they really do like a lot of bright light. As I say, this one is in a south-facing window and this one is under a grow light. And if you don't have a south-facing window, they can definitely tolerate other aspects as well, but they're probably not going to really enjoy a northern window because it's just not going to be enough light for them to thrive, and you do risk them getting things like root rot and stuff like that. So it is best to have them in a brighter spot in your house and close to a window if possible. What I find with this plant and with a lot of string of plants is that they tend to come in quite deep pots, and I have no idea why, because they actually have a relatively shallow root system. So they would actually much prefer to be in a shallower pot rather than being sort of like having all this sort of damp soil around them, especially if like the root system's up here but they've always got like this much damp soil at the bottom. That is not going to work well for the health of your plant. So once you've got your plant and you've let it establish and acclimate to your home for maybe a month or so, I would consider repotting it, just getting it out of that pot and just seeing what it looks like. If it looks like there's lots and lots of roots around the top and then a big block of soil at the bottom, or the soil looks particularly damp and moisture retentive, I would consider removing that soil and putting it into a chunky mix of equal parts cocoa coir, perlite and orchid bark. That is just a much more aerated mix that will mean the roots are not sat in a load of damp soil. And I would also consider putting it into a smaller pot as well. So either like a shallow pot if you have one, or just a smaller pot in general. They don't mind being a little bit root bound, and like they prefer that to be swimming in soil. So yeah, that was one thing that I would say in terms of trying to maintain that sort of healthy root system that's really important for these plants. Normally when I see them going downhill at clients' houses and things like that, it's normally that they've just been overwatered. So how do you know if your string of hearts needs to be watered? Well, these are one of those fantastic plants that really tells you, and you can tell by the looking at the leaves and feeling the leaf whether or not the plant needs to be watered or not. So the best way to do it is just to get a mature leaf, and what I mean by that is not one of the newer leaves, because the newer leaves always tend to be softer, but finding yourself one of the older leaves and just feeling it in between your fingers very, very gently. And does it feel firm? Like this one feels really firm to me right now. If it feels firm to the touch, the plant is obviously storing a lot of water in its leaves and it doesn't need to be watered. If the leaves start to feel like soft and I could almost like quite easily move them, then I would say that plant is thirsty, and then I would take that plant to the sink, give it a thorough water, let all the water drain through, and then place it back into its decorative planter, whether that be a hanging planter or just a decorative planter like this one. And that way you can't overwater them. They are pretty drought tolerant, so if you go up to them and you feel that they're like very, very soft, don't worry, they will bounce back. But once they've got root rot, they do tend to go downhill quite quickly. You'll see a lot of leaf drop. You'll then end up with like very bare stems, and the plant will just die quite quickly. So I would say it's always better to underwater than overwater when it comes to any of the string of plants. The other thing is you can get a wooden skewer, just insert it into the soil. Let me grab one. Wooden skewer like this. These are just like, you can get these from like the 99p store or anything like that. Stick it into the soil, move it around, go to another place over here, stick it into the soil, move it around, go to another place like here, into the soil, move it around, and then bring it out. If it comes out with soil attached to it, like this one here, that's clearly showing you that there is still quite a lot of wet soil or moist soil in the pot, and therefore this plant doesn't need to be watered, which adds up with the fact that the leaves feel quite firm to the touch, and therefore that's two ways of just double checking that your plant does or doesn't need to be watered. When it comes to fertilizing, I fertilize these plants all year round when I water, with every water, as long as I'm like organized enough to do it. Obviously if it's really thirsty and I'm like, oh, I'm running out the house, I'm just going to give it some water, then that's one thing. But otherwise, if I'm actively watering my plants, I will fertilize this plant with every water. And yeah, I just fertilize them as long as the plant is actively growing, which with these ones I find they're just growing all year round. And they will even flower. They will give you these funny looking blooms, and they flower pretty much like, they can flower all year round sometimes, but I guess more so in the spring and summer months. And the flowers are a little bit annoying because they can produce them like in great quantities and they drop all over the floor. And I used to pick them off, and now I just let it do its thing. I can't really be bothered. Some people like them, some people find them annoying. It's just one of those things, and as and when they fall off, I just sweep them up, hoover them up or whatever. But otherwise, I just let this plant get on with it really, because they produce them so much. It would take longer for me to pick them all off than it would to sweep them up as and when. So I just let it do its thing. So yeah, that's really it for care requirements. In terms of humidity, I don't provide any additional humidity in my home. I've talked about this before, but my home always sits somewhere around about 50 to 60% humidity naturally. Obviously a little bit lower in the summer if it's very dry, which it often isn't here in London, and in the wetter months it can get up to over 70% humidity. So I don't provide any additional humidity, and I don't think these plants care either way, so they're pretty tolerant when it comes to humidity. Okay, so let's talk about propagation, and let me show you two ways in which I propagate my string of hearts. And this can also work for obviously the non-variegated string of hearts and also the string of arrows, which is very similar. I'll bring one over just to show you that one as well. But yeah, very similar to this. You can do it in exactly the same way. Okay, so when it comes to propagation, the first thing we're going to do is chop our little friend here. So as I said, this one hangs in my living room and it's starting to tickle people's noses that are sitting below it. So I'm thinking I'm gonna make a chop around about here. Just make sure you've got some clean scissors. You can always sterilize them with rubbing alcohol. And I'm just gonna try and snip through the stems. I could just go like that, but I'm likely to cut through some of the leaves doing that, and I don't want to do that. So yeah, snippity snip. Let's see where we're at. I think we're done. Okay, so I've taken quite a good chunk off here. And this is now where we are going to make them into little butterfly shapes. Now you do want a good size leaf, like for example, that's the new growth there. And that's quite small, and I'm probably not going to use those ones. I'd rather have the leaves that look a little bit bigger. Because when I then go on to grow them, they've got a better chance. So what we're going to do is just get our stem here, for example, and snip. So you want to get it so these leaves grow in like little pairs like this. So we just want a little pair of leaves, and then we're going to cut the stem down either side. Oops. So you get something like that with a little bit of stem and then your two leaves. And so I'm now going to go through and cut all these into little butterflies, and I'm going to speed this up and put some music on because nobody's got the time to sit through that. It's weird that I actually find this quite therapeutic. They can get and do get very easily tangled, but I've given up on trying to detangle the ones that I have hanging because nobody's got time for that either. Okay, so I've cut up quite a few little heart butterflies here. As I said, just two leaves with a little bit of stem there. And then I'm just going to show you two different ways you can do it. The first one is just to do it in soil, and the second one is in moss. So let's do soil first. Okay, so I've got my normal chunky mix here. You don't want it super chunky when you're doing propagations because you do obviously want it to still hold on to quite a good amount of water. If the cuttings dry out, they're obviously very vulnerable at this point and they will just die off quite quickly. So although this is chunky, it's still got enough moisture retentive stuff going on to make sure it doesn't dry out too quickly. And I'm not going to fill it up to the top because, as I say, it's not going to have any root system yet. So I'm just going to fill it up a little bit like that. And then I'm going to place our little butterflies and lay them on top of the soil. So lay them down, or you could even, if you can, try and insert one of these stems sort of into the soil. But as long as they're making contact with the soil, then it should be fine. And then what we'll do is, after we've watered them, we will add some cling film over the top, or you can put it inside a Tupperware if you don't like to use cling film, just to keep the humidity in, or a glass cloche would work really well as well. So I'm literally just going through and putting all of these on the top here. Let me just see if I can get another angle to show you a little bit better. Oh, sparrow, sorry. Very easily distracted. I don't get a lot of birds in my garden, so when I do, I get excited. Okay, so just adding these in like this. And some of them definitely sort of sit better on top, like the ones that are flatter, like this one's nice and flat here. It's going to sit nicely on top. So it's going to look like that. You're literally just placing them on top, but you want to make sure that the node, this bit here, there, if that makes, can you see like that bit where, right in the middle there, you want to make sure that that is flat on top of the soil. So let's find some nice flat ones. So that's probably about as much as I'm going to get into that one there. I don't want to overcrowd it too much because when the roots start coming in, they tend to like push each other out of the way a little bit. So for that soil one, I'm just going to leave it like that. And I might do like multiple soil ones. I normally do like a batch and maybe do like 3 or 4 different pots or something like that. So that's what we're going to do for the soil one. I'm just going to put this to one side and then we're going to talk through the moss one, and then we can talk about how we water them, the positions and so forth at the end. Okay, so for our moss one, we've just got like a Tupperware like this, and I'm just going to fill this with moss. I really like to use the sphagnum moss from Soil Ninja. It's just the best quality one that I found, and also it's pretty because it comes in like, look at the colour of it. It's like pinks and greens and all sorts of things in there. It's just lovely stuff. Always works really well for propagations. So we're just going to do like a sort of a layer at the bottom like that. You don't need loads and loads, but you want to make sure all of the plastic at the bottom is covered and there's enough moss for the root system to grow into. So like that will be absolutely fine. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing when we get our little butterflies, and we're going to place them on top of the moss and make sure that the node is in contact. And actually, like, because the moss is quite springy but already damp, they tend to sit a little bit better on here than they do in the soil. So just placing all these on here, and obviously this is a bigger container, so I can sort of get away with putting more of them on. And then with this one, if I have a lid for it, I will literally just put the plastic lid on, and if I don't have a lid for it, then I will again just cover it with some cling film, or like I say, if you don't like to use cling film, you can also put it inside another Tupperware box or something like that. But you do definitely need to keep that humidity in. You do not want these drying out because they will just die. If you do find that you get the odd rotten one, it can happen. I generally don't find it to be a problem. You just want to make sure that the soil or the moss is damp but not like super wet. Obviously there's no drainage with this particular Tupperware here, so I don't want it sitting with a layer of water at the bottom. I am going to increase my chance of the cuttings rotting if I do that. This Soil Ninja stuff comes out of the bag already quite damp, so I don't tend to add much moisture to it at the beginning, and then once it's got the lid on, like, the humidity stays in pretty well. The only thing that I might do is occasionally open it up just to give it like some fresh air, and then I might use my little squeezy bottle here with some fertilized water in it, just to dribble a little bit of fertilized water in there, and that will then, you know, give the cuttings a little bit of a boost. But often I find it works really well. Sometimes I don't open the box even for ages. I forget about them, and then I'm like, oh, I wonder what's in that box, and I'm like, oh look, it's string of hearts, and they've all done really well. Maybe the one might have died off or rotted or something like that, and that'll be it. Okay, so I think this one's nice and full as well. So again, you're just laying the cuttings down on the moss like that. Okay, so we've got our two little ways of propagation here. Obviously they're very similar at the start. The only difference is really the substrate. And as I say, I'm now going to just get a little bit of fertilized water in my little squeezy bottle here. I like this because I can direct where I want to put the water and I don't end up oversaturating the substrate. So I can just do a little dribble in here, a little dribble over here, and then I can cover both of these, like I say, to keep the humidity in. And then I'm going to put them up in my loft because it is the brightest and warmest room in the house, so it's the best place for propagations, and it's also out of the way because I don't really like having a load of propagations on show, just because I don't think it always looks very attractive in the home. So I tend to put these in my loft where nobody can really see them apart from moi, and yeah, keep these well, and then keep an eye on them. And then I'm just going to show you some that I propagated, gosh, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago or something like that, and I'll just show you how those are getting on. Okay, so here is the little string of hearts that I propagated. Like I say, I think it was around about 6 weeks ago in the soil. And once they start putting out new growth, and you can see that there is some roots forming as well. And that's what's nice about using clear pots, is that you can clearly monitor the root system. And once you see little roots forming and they're starting to press against like the cling film or whatever you've got them in, and they're starting to trail out, you can obviously remove the extra sort of humidity, whatever you're using, and they can grow in normal room humidity. So that little plant is all ready to either give away as a gift or keep for myself. Or I could also add that back into the mother plant, because these plants do tend to get quite bald on the top. So there's the top of mine here. So this section is a little bit bald here. So I could potentially add that new plant into here and get it to trail out this way. So there's always lots of options for what you can do, or you can swap it with a friend and get yourself a new plant. That's that little one. And then, sorry, I've just run up and down the stairs to the loft back as well. Get out of breath. Here is, oh yes, I've done these quite recently. This is probably maybe 3 weeks ago. These are actually the string of arrows that I was talking about. So they look quite similar, but they are a slightly different plant. And these ones are in moss. And as you can see, they've started to root. Let's pull the little one out there. They've rooted into the moss, and you've got a little root system there. Just place that one back in. So yeah, that's that one there. And then I've got another one here. Oh, I think I did these ones at the same time, probably again about 3 weeks ago or maybe a month ago. And the only thing about rooting into the moss is you've then got to try and remove all the moss at some point before you add them into your whatever substrate you're going to do it in. Probably soil, because they work really well in soil. That can be a bit fiddly, but what I think I would suggest is when they're almost at this point, maybe a little bit longer, to pot them into soil at this point. And that's the nice thing about propagating straight into soil, is that you don't have to then do that next step. But oh, I've got a little corm in here. Don't even know what corm that is. And yeah, I would let them root into the moss for too long. The longer you let them root into the moss, the obviously more difficult it's going to be. The more knotty they get into the moss, and the more difficult it is to try and get them out again. So yeah, but as you can see, it works really well and relatively quickly, especially in the spring and summer months when the weather is warmer. Just make sure they're getting a good amount of light. They don't want to be in a dark spot. That's going to take them much, much longer to start to root. And yeah, then you can make yourself new little plants. And it's really as easy as that. Going to hang my string of hearts back into its place in the living room, where it's no longer going to be tickling people's noses. And yeah, that looks much better. Anyway, so thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. Please like, share and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.